I'm grateful that I live in a pluralistic culture. I'm grateful that I live in a culture where we will defend your right to believe whatever you choose to believe. I celebrate that. That is the way I would define tolerance. Tolerance is, I respect your right to freely choose to believe whatever you want to believe. But the way many people in my culture have defined tolerance today, I think, is totally wrong. Often in our culture today, tolerance means if you're a Muslim or a Buddhist or a Hindu or an atheist, you're saying the same thing that I, a follower of Jesus, am saying. No, we're not saying the same thing. And to define tolerance as all religions are saying the same thing is not tolerance, it's being brain dead, is my point. Now, if you're atheist, Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, whatever, and I'm a follower of Christ, for me as a follower of Christ, I respect you as a human being, first of all. Secondly, I respect your right to choose to believe whatever you want to believe. In fact, I'll fight for your right to believe whatever you want to believe. That's pluralism in a good sense as far as I'm concerned. That's tolerance in a good sense as far as I'm concerned.
Romans 14, it says to not judge your brother and sister, and also to bring up that, but also to say, like, as all sins are the same in God's eyes, and why would he do that?
Okay, hold on, those are two great questions. I might forget one of them, so I'll get the first one, okay?
Well, there are two questions in the same, kind of combining them.
Well, they're two great questions, all right? I'm going to go out of both. All right, the first one is Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. Jesus says, judge not, lest you be judged. Now, that is one of the most misinterpreted verses in America today. Because the majority of Americans say, see, Jesus says judge not, so all religions are therefore the same. No. 14 verses later in Matthew 7:15, Jesus says, beware of false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they're ferocious wolves. So obviously when Jesus says judge not, lest you be judged, he's not saying suspend your critical thinking, except everything is equally valid. Because 14 verses later he's saying, watch out for false prophets, they're going to eat your lunch. So what does he mean when he says judge not, lest you be judged? I think it's real clear from the context. He means, I am not to have a self-righteous attitude that looks down on you and says, you know something, maybe one day you'll be really lucky and you'll get your act together the way I obviously got my act together. See, it's that self-righteous, judging another person as inferior to me. And Christ says, no, don't do it. Okay, now your second question was, isn't all sin the same? In one sense, yes. In one sense, no. All sin is the same in the sense that all sin separates me from God. My lust separates me from God the same way a guy who date rapes, that date rape separates him from God. That is why I, Attila the Hun, Stalin, Hitler, Jeffrey Dahmer, Mother Teresa, we all need Jesus Christ because all of us have sinned. But no, ma'am, all sin is not the same in its ethical implications. It is far worse to rape ethically than it is to lust. It is far worse to have a slave than it is to have a temptation and give into it to tell a racist joke. So ethically, there's a difference. It's far worse to murder ethically than it is to hate. But both murder and hate will separate me from God because God is holy. And that's why I need Christ, who bled and died on a cross to forgive me for my hatred, lust, subtle racist attitudes, etc. Okay, have I answered you?
I believe there's just one more thing. So in God's eyes, all sins are the same, except ethically they're different. Are they categorized? As in, like, well, because I today ran a red light, and then my friend killed a dog the other day, I'm not as bad as this person? Or, I mean, because that's ethically worse than me running a red light.
Great question. If I take an animal and torture the animal, that is absolutely wrong. But it is not as bad as if I take a human being and torture that human being. Because a human being has a value that that animal does not have. The animal's valuable, and that's why it's wrong, absolutely wrong for me to torture an animal. But it is far worse for me to torture a human being. It's wrong for me to destroy the environment. God created this world. And if I destroy the environment, I'm basically saying, God, when you created this world, you did a lousy job. But it's far worse for me to slaughter a little baby than it is for me to pour chemicals into my river. I would argue, ethically. But you see, both deeds are sin. So even if I never murder a baby, but if I pour chemicals into a stream and pollute the environment, I need to ask God for forgiveness for destroying his good earth.
Right, so back to that question over there, though. He used those people who are not perfect and who still sin to judge the other people who still sin. And if sin's all the same, then why weren't they condemned as well? Why?
Good point. Great point. You're right. I do not know why at that point in history God used the Jewish people to judge the Canaanites. I also, you see, you got to read Habakkuk in the Old Testament. It's this Hebrew prophet who begins to understand God is going to use the Assyrians to judge the Israelites? God, give me a break. Don't you know how warped and wicked the Assyrians are? How could you use the Assyrians to judge the Jews? And God's point is, you're right. They're pretty warped people, those Assyrians. But I'm going to use them to judge the Jews. That's not a statement that the Assyrians are these wonderful, pristine, pure people. The same way, it's not a statement that the Jews are superior when God uses them to judge the Canaanites. Not at all. And in Jesus' first sermon, recorded in Luke chapter 4, he's teaching in a synagogue, and he points out to the Jewish people, God loves Gentiles just as much as he does Jews. He attacks their racial superiority complex. Angered, they stand up, grab him, bring him to a cliff at the side of the town to throw him to his death. Jesus clearly attacked that ethnic superiority complex of the Jewish people of his day.
Right now in Tibet, maybe, there is a Buddhist monk talking to people in the University of Tibet.
Yes.
And he comes from a total different tradition,
Yes.
a culture. And none of us speaks Tibetan. I don't know if you speak
Right.
Tibetan.
I don't.
Maybe he speaks a little bit English, and he has he looks at National Geographic, and modest monk, very modest. So I don't think this person is going to hell. I mean, he has his own belief, and he thinks that's what he believes is correct. And he comes from, as I said, different tradition, culture. So I think when you say your religion is this, a little bit more tolerance would be healthier, I think. Otherwise, there is a risk that I believe there is a risk that the religion, as you present it, can slide into a dogmatic ideological religion. And but if religion is supposed to be embracing people, then I think we should, or about homosexuals. I think homosexuals are humans too, and we would like to embrace them too if they're because they're in essence, you say that in essence they're humans as well. So
Okay.
I wouldn't just directly put them into hell, and so I would suggest a little bit more tolerance.
Okay? Let me ask you. If you're confronted by an Eskimo who puts his baby out in the snow to freeze to death, is it ethnocentric of you, is it arrogant of you to plead with the Eskimo to not put the baby out in the snow to freeze to death?
Okay, but as well,
Is it intolerant of you to plead with an Eskimo to not put the baby out on the ice in the snow to freeze to death? Is that being ethnocentric? Is that being arrogant of you to plead with the Eskimo not to do that? If you go to Papua New Guinea, and if you're confronted by people who are cannibalistic, and if you plead with them not to eat other human beings, is that being culturally arrogant of you?
now is that question the right question? Is my question, because as well the Eskimo can say something which is relevant to his ideas, which we're doing wrong, and which he thinks what we're doing is wrong, and he thinks it's right. So I mean, it's I have to understand their realities. If I live in Eskimo society and I don't know, 10 of their children die, or some, I don't know, their realities is different. I have to understand. I cannot go take my realities from here and just judge it like that. I have to understand their situation and respect to that.
Okay.
Have to make my decision.
Fine.
But I don't believe it's an evil drive that they do it. It's because of an evil drive. I'm sure there is a cultural, ethnocentric explanation for that.
Uh-huh. All right. So, if I understand what you're saying confronted by an Eskimo who puts his baby out in the snow to freeze to death, you're just going to sit back and say, well, that's your thing. It's okay. Confronted by a cannibal in Papua New Guinea who's eating human beings, you're going to step back and say, well, that's your cultural expression of your values, so that's okay.
Really, a very, very extreme example you're giving me. And
I give it for a purpose, obviously.
A lot of examples in between.
Obviously there are.
And yeah, there's a lot of examples in between. So I mean, so it's not this drastic in those examples, the contrast in cultures. It's mostly more similar, I think.
Fine. I am not out here saying that the Western culture is right. I'm standing out here saying Jesus of Nazareth made some very clear truth claims. I am the mailman. I'm not the authority. I'm simply delivering Jesus' mail. Jesus claimed to be God in human form. He claimed to be God come to the rescue. He claimed to bleed and die on a cross to offer all of us forgiveness. And Jesus said that if we put our faith in him, he would give us eternal life with God in heaven. I'm simply delivering the mail.
Okay, it could make sense what you're saying to me because I've been living in this society. I was brought up in this society. But if I was born, as I said, like in Tibet, and would live there all my life long, wouldn't speak any English, wouldn't be exposed to any Western culture, that wouldn't make sense to me, as it doesn't make that much sense to me that the Eskimos leave their babies outside. So it's to me it could make sense to me, but that doesn't mean anything. It has to make sense. If religion is supposed to be universal, it has to make sense to the Eskimo as well.
There are far more followers of Jesus Christ in Asia than there are in the West.
Well, there's reasons for that, historic reasons for that, too.
Jesus is not a white phenomenon.
There is much more Asian people than in the West as well.
Right.
So there's much more, the population of Asia is much higher than Europe or America.
Yeah, but we're not out here talking about the American flag, apple pie, and Jesus. Isn't that the wonderful combo? You can pick it up at McDonald's. We're not talking about that. We're talking about an historical person, Jesus of Nazareth, who didn't live in the Big Apple, and he wasn't American, and he wasn't a capitalist either. He was a first-century Palestinian Jew who claimed to be more than a man. He claimed to be God in human form. And he claimed that his death on the cross was the vehicle through which God offers us forgiveness for our human sin. So we're not talking about the great American way. We're not talking about the great white hope. We're talking about God who loves the world so much that he sent his only son, Jesus. Now the question is, was this Jesus an arrogant turkey, a lunatic, or was he speaking the truth? That's the issue. And if he was speaking the truth, that's just as true in Tibet as it is in Austin, or in New York City, or in Calcutta, or in Moscow. But if he's blowing smoke, then it's a lie everywhere.
To me, Jesus is just a man that's been deified over history with the Bible, given supernatural, characteristics. But he could have been just a man just like you, anywhere just like this, just talking about what he thinks, what he thinks is right. But what is right? There is some validity. You can't prove religion. It's all myth. It's myth. You can't prove religion. You can't prove it. Prove it to me that Jesus existed. Prove to me that these precepts are
Sure, no
correct.
problem. I'll prove to you Jesus if you first of all prove to me Napoleon. I'll prove to you Jesus if you first prove to me George Washington. I'll prove to you Jesus if you first
No,
prove to
I
me
said no.
George Washington Carver.
Don't prove the person's existence. I'm saying prove the ideas that the person talks about. Prove to me what there's a heaven that's up there. Prove to me that there's, this truth, that your God truly exists. Prove to me that these precepts of the Bible are truly what true revelation. Prove to me that these things are actually there. I'm an empiricist. Prove to me that they're there.
All right, I'll do that. If first of all you prove to me that your taste buds are telling you the truth when they tell you you're drinking sour milk.
Secondary ration, some things you can't prove, so then you fall upon
Some
faith.
things you can't prove. Sir, I'm sorry, I haven't communicated clearly. Sir, you can't prove a thing. To prove means to show it cannot be another way. You cannot prove a thing in life. You as a thinking human being don't base your life on proof. You base your life on evidence. What does the evidence point to? And you follow the evidence. To prove means to show it cannot be another way. What can you prove in life? Prove to me we're having this conversation right now. You can't prove it. We might be dreaming. Someone might have dropped some drugs in our tea. But the evidence is we're having this conversation. That's why I'm hanging in there with you. That's why you're hanging in there with me. Evidence. Okay, so the evidence is God exists. The evidence is the order and the design of the cosmos point to an intelligent mind. Moral absolutes point to some moral giver, lawgiver. Life comes from life. Never once have I ever seen life come from non-life. An atheist is someone who says, oh yeah, at some point, somewhere, at one time, in La La Land, life came from non-life. And I'm saying, all of my experience shows me life comes from life. Never once have I seen life come from non-life. Fourth piece of evidence, free will. If there is no God, you're just a hunk of biochemical reactions. That's all I am. You're not free. You're determined by your biochemical reactions. So am I. I'm sorry. I judge myself at night. I say, you know, Cliff, when you spoke to that student, that was pretty rude. When you spoke to that student, boy, you displayed a lot of patience, man. Tomorrow do that again and don't do that. I judge myself. I critique myself. I'm free. I don't have to do what I do. Well, if I'm free, it means there's more to me than just my biochemical makeup. There's a soul, a personality, an I that goes beyond the biochemical. I have a free will. Well, the free will can only exist if there's some type of God who creates me biochemically, but also gives me a will that's not totally dependent upon my biochemical reactions. That's why I believe God exists. Now, why do I believe Jesus is reliable? Because the historical evidence of the way he lived, what he taught, how he died, how he rose from the dead, points to his credibility. If you live like Jesus lived, if you teach what he taught, if you died the way he died, loving and forgiving your enemies, and if 3 days later you rise from the dead, sir, I will listen very closely to everything you have to say, because the evidence is you're trustworthy. So that's why I believe in Jesus. Does that make any sense?
Slightly, yes, but still, you must admit that a lot of religious beliefs and stuff fall upon the ideas of fate, and that there's some things you can answer. And so that it sort of directs us up towards secondary rationalization. That's all religion is to me. Is that what you can explain by empirical evidence, you go to faith.
Sir, if you get a postdoc degree in chemistry, do you know everything there is to know about chemistry?
I'm sure you don't. No,
Thank you. Does anybody know everything about any topic? No. Nobody has exhaustive knowledge in any area. And if I have communicated to you in the slightest that I know everything there is about God, I apologize. I have radically miscommunicated. Instead, what I've tried to communicate is I'm a beggar who has found where living bread is in a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And I've come to tell fellow beggars where they too can find bread. And the best answer I give often is, I do not know. You're right, sir. There are a lot of mysteries about God, a lot of unanswered questions. You bet.
I believe that the morals of the religions are basically correct. But I think that religion basically came about because if there wasn't religion, don't get me wrong, I don't believe in God, but I'm happy that religion is in the world. Because if religion of some sort was not in the world, then humans, like you said, would consider themselves completely insignificant beings. And whether that's correct or not, I mean, frankly, I think that science is continuing to prove that we are, more and more, things we attributed prior to the supernatural is more and more being proven through science. And if we embrace the fact that we're insignificant beings, then we're not going to live the lives the way we should. We're going to walk around saying, beating up our neighbors, saying, well, it doesn't matter that I'm beating up my neighbor because there's no reason I'm going to die, he's going to die, what's the difference? And obviously, humans have come up with a moral code within themselves over history saying that that's not the correct thing to do. I don't necessarily think God did that. I think that humans, after you punch someone in the face that they're not happy about it, and thinking, wow, I wouldn't be happy if that happened to me, embrace an idea that, wow, that's not the correct thing to do. I don't think God did that. I think that was human experience. And so therefore, if people want to attribute that to God, that's fine if it makes them not do that. If my believing in God and thinking I'm going to go to hell prevents me from punching someone in the face, fine, believe in God, it's worth it, But I think that the reason that people do that, the more important idea is the ethical code, how we treat one another, not how we treat a glorified yet undistinguishable God.
What do you have to say to me if I say, listen, man, I've only got 60 to 80 years to live on this planet,
Right.
and I want to steal some of his money
Right.
because I only have 60 to 80 years,
Right.
and I want as much pleasure, as much happiness in my life as I can.
Right.
So why shouldn't I steal?
The reason you shouldn't steal is just because there may not be a God who's condemning you for it. It doesn't mean that your actions don't have an effect on the people around you. That's where people have differences. If you steal from someone, it has an effect on people around you. And I think that the morals that we've developed for ourselves in most religions are based on the fact that it's not the correct thing to do to intentionally hurt people around you. And you can say the same thing for the Holocaust. You can justify that, people could say the Holocaust, you killed thousands of people, but they're going to die anyway. But the fact is that that action affected people from generations and generations and generations, so forth. And so I think that the reason we have our moral code is not to uphold the word of God, but, that our actions affect the people around us. We can't, like you said, there's no answer. We don't see God. We don't know everything about God. We're trusting our perceptions. And I think our perceptions of the people around us are much more valid than our perceptions of a God, because we can see the people around us. We can interact with them. And I don't think, maybe you can, but the average person cannot go, hey, God, what's up, and have a conversation.
Yeah, but if what you say is correct, that morality simply comes from our common sense, our rational thinking, don't you understand my rational thinking that tells me I've got 60 to 80 years to live on this planet, I need some money, he's got more than enough money to take care of his needs, I'm going to steal some of his money. Don't you understand my rationale?
I can understand the rationale, and I mean, like you said, you judge not lest ye be judged. You may consider that incorrect. People don't have the same moralities. But I think universally, if you look over history, you keep on citing history, you cite that people think this is wrong. And the reason...
So what? You think I'm going to base my life on what the majority of people think? Is that what you're asking me to do?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. So I'm saying if the majority of people here are Christians. So, I mean, how can you say that, that we should follow the word of God, based on the fact that most people are Christians and they believe in it as well? I mean, it's no different.
I don't think the majority of people at the University of Texas are seeking to follow Jesus Christ. Do you?
Well, no, but they may consider themselves Christians. There's a difference in that, I'll agree.
Yeah. So, I think it's pretty commonly accepted that to steal and not get caught, it's not that bad. It's bad to get caught. That's what happens to the dummies. But if you can steal and not get caught, like an NCAA football program or basketball program, it's not wrong to do something illegal in terms of getting the best ball players in. It's just wrong to get caught and get put on probation. So for me to steal, as long as I don't get caught, I mean, what's wrong with that?
Are you meaning to suggest that the only reason that is wrong is because Jesus Christ said it was wrong?
No.
Okay.
You have told me that the basis of your morality is your common sense, your rational thinking. Well, I want to know your rational thinking that is supposed to show me that stealing from this guy is wrong.
My rational thinking that stealing is wrong is because it directly affects another person in a negative way. And from own experiences with a rationale of that, don't hurt others unless you want to be hurt yourself. I don't think that's a strictly Christian concept. I think that's a concept which all of us develop over time. It doesn't matter what religion we are. I grew up Jewish, and Judaism embraced that. I'm atheist now. Atheism embraces that. It's experience. It's experience of getting hurt ourselves. It's experience of seeing how that's unpleasant and not wanting to have that be brought upon someone else that we consider an equal. It's got nothing to do with the fact that, we think that we're going to go to heaven if we do that. If that's our motivation for doing it. If we don't steal because we think God's going to stick us in heaven because of it, that's the wrong motivation. You do it because it's something you generally believe in, not because you think it's going to get you something later on in your next life.
Yeah,
That's
but
not
don't you
the
see
right
what you're
reason to do it.
saying? You're doing exactly what you're critiquing. You're saying, well, there are no moral absolutes. It's all a question of making it up in your head. And therefore, if I make up in my head that the benefits that I will gain are far more than him losing because of how much money he has, a few $1,000, I'm going to steal because the benefits are so great.
Right.
Well, what's wrong with that, man?
It's a judgment call. I mean, obviously we can think it's wrong, but
It's all relative, right?
obviously, yes, it's all relative. It's all relative.
So we're not going to get sentimental and get really sloppy and say, oh, no, Cliff, you should really not steal because, You know, it's really not a nice thing to do.
Well, that's my personal opinion. I'm not saying that everyone here has to necessarily agree with that opinion. It's their own judgment call.
Yeah.
It's based on their experience.
Right.
But you asked me why I wouldn't steal, and I answered that question. That doesn't mean this is why everyone shouldn't steal. Based on my opinion, my own developed morality from growing up, from experiencing, that's why I wouldn't steal.
Mm-hmm.
It's not saying that everyone in the world shouldn't steal because of that. It's not saying that, you know, I think this is the only morality. This is the morality that I've established and I believe in, and I think that most people have taken that morality upon their own experience of seeing, you know, other people in pain, seeing, you know, knowing what it's like to be in pain, and knowing they wouldn't wish that upon someone else.
Right.
And I
But
don't
you see,
think
you're
we need
so
a
upset
religion.
and frustrated with me because I have a basis for my morality, which is obviously God. And you're sort of saying, well, you see, Cliff, I just believe people make this up so that they can have their moral absolutes. But don't you see what you're doing? You're telling me that morality is relative. But then you're not taking it seriously. Meaning by that, your positions on battered wives, abused children, stealing. You don't really believe that whatever the position is you hold, the opposite is equally as valid. You insist, you keep on saying, oh, come on, Cliff, you really know that stealing is wrong. You see, you can't live out your moral relativism. You're consistently trying to push me back to, come on, Cliff, you really do know, don't you, that stealing's wrong. Come on, Cliff, come on, buddy. What do you mean? You believe it's all relative. What are you doing telling me, oh, come on, Cliff, you really do know it's wrong. No. If what you believe is true, if there is no God, then it's not really wrong to steal. It's all relative. So whatever your position is on stealing, rape, date rape, child abuse, battered wives, you have to acknowledge in order to be consistent that the opposite position is just as valid as yours.
I'd like to invite you to Grace Community Church, located at 365 Lukeswood Road in New Canaan, Connecticut. Our services are at 9:30 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. on Sundays. Hope you can join us.